Hi, everyone. Welcome to Breaking the Silence, a podcast produced by Angels Protection, Inc., where we uplift the voices of young women and mothers and the leaders, clinicians, and educators that are systems builders working to transform healthcare. I'm your host, Makaila Davis, founder and chairwoman of Angels Protection, Inc. And our Her Voice in Healthcare series is dedicated to women whose leadership goes beyond clinical expertise. Okay. Women who are designing systems, shaping policy, educating future leaders, and advancing health equity at a scale. This series exists because healthcare is not just about treatment. It's about systems, it's about safety, it's about accountability. It's about ensuring that every patient, especially those historically overlooked, receives care that is equitable, effective, and humane. And today's guest embodies that mission. Dr. Mary Reich Cooper is an MD and JD and is nationally recognized physician, executive, educator, healthcare quality leader whose work has shaped patient safety, quality improvement, operational excellence across major healthcare systems and academic institutions. She currently serves as Associate Professor of Population Health at Thomas Jefferson University College of Population Health, where she is the Program Director for Healthcare Quality and Safety and Operational Excellence, Healthcare Administration, and Population Health. Since joining Jefferson, Dr. Cooper has led the design and launch of several transformative programs, including the Masters of Health Administration program, the Lean Six Sigma program, the Quality Improvement and Patient Safety Leadership program, and the Health Systems Science curriculum for the Sidney Kimmel Medical College. Through her work, she has mentored hundreds of students and healthcare professionals and overseen more than 200 healthcare quality and safety capstone projects, helping prepare the next generation of leaders to improve healthcare systems from the inside out. Before transitioning fully into academia, Dr. Cooper spent decades in executive leadership roles, including Chief Quality Officer and Senior Vice President of Clinical Services for the Connecticut Hospital Association, and Senior Vice President and Chief Quality Officer for Lifespan Corporation. Early in her career, she served as Chief Quality Officer at the New York Presbyterian Hospital, where she led large-scale quality and operational initiatives, including Lean Six Sigma programs that generated over 80 million in value, and system-wide safety and reliability training impacting more than 70,000 healthcare professionals. Dr. Cooper began her career practicing internal medicine before transitioning into administration and earning her degree in health law, reflecting her deep understanding of both clinical care and healthcare policy. She holds degrees from Duke University, Temple University School of Medicine, and Pace University School of Law, and is widely recognized for her contributions of healthcare quality, patient safety, and leadership development. What sets Dr. Cooper apart is her ability to bridge medicine, policy, education, and system strategy, ensuring healthcare systems are not only efficient, but safe, equitable, and accountable. And I just want to welcome you to the podcast today.
I'm so honored to be here, and thank you so much for inviting me.
Yes, thank you so much. So I kind of just wanted to start by asking you, what first inspired your transition from clinical medicine into healthcare quality and leadership?
Lots of things happen for all of us just because we're in the right place at the right time and something just catches us and we embrace it and we say, let's go with this. And that's exactly what happened earlier in my career. I had my first mentor in medicine, who was the chairperson of my department of medicine at the time at the hospital at which I was working. I was a young mom. I had just had my first son, and I was working as before hospitalists were called hospitalists. That's the work I was doing, but it didn't have the name yet. And he asked me if I'd be interested in working on some special projects in the Department of Medicine. And when I said yes, I had the opportunity to build a PA program, physician assistant program for the cardiology program there. And then he asked me to oversee the healthcare quality work in the department to get us ready for our next Joint Commission survey. And I didn't even know what healthcare quality was at that time. Physicians were not involved in healthcare quality. They certainly didn't have expertise in it. People didn't get degrees in healthcare quality and safety like they do now. It was totally learning on the job. So I loved it. I loved being able to create and build and kind of be entrepreneurial within an organization. And from that point on, I was just hooked.
No, I love that. And I think also too, you know, that organizational development that you touched on too is really important. And I also wanted to, that goes into my next question. So you hold both an MD and a JD. So how does that interdisciplinary perspective shape how you approach healthcare systems?
So while I was learning about healthcare quality and safety, I thought I was going to go back and get a master's in public health, and I started taking coursework in epidemiology and in statistics. And I confess I didn't love it. And I thought, gosh, what else can I do? I feel like I need another degree to really round myself out in terms of which sounds so crazy, right? I mean, sort of all of us who who already have graduate degrees, why are we getting so many? But lots of people are, as you well know. So I had always been interested in health policy. I have a long history of service to and involvement in social justice and reproductive justice and ensuring that we address health equity. And so when I first started looking at health policy kinds of programs, I thought that I would do health policy, but then my husband upended everything by getting a new job in New York. And so as a family, we all wanted to move to New York together. And I thought, you know what, maybe law school might be the answer. And that's what I did. I ended up applying to law schools and focusing my interest in law on health law in law school. But also, sort of really getting a good grounding in legal principles and responsibilities. And to be quite honest, I read as much about law nowadays as I do about medicine. It's just one of those things that just, again, sort of caught my interest and I just really embraced it.
No, I love that. And especially as you touched on like reproductive justice and social justice and how that all ties into in your journey into law school. So also too, I wanted to ask, how can organizations embed quality and safety into everyday practice, not just as initiatives, but as a culture?
It has to be a culture, Makaila. I mean, as you already, sort of understand, the likelihood that organizations can create change within the organization, unless just embedding it into every single thing they do, is is difficult because there are so many competing priorities. So what I hear, for example, from my colleagues in the field, is that post-COVID, for example, when the financial difficulties for healthcare became so readily apparent that we weren't going to bounce back from those few years where healthcare had just become so absorbed by the pandemic. We saw many organizations decrease their investment in healthcare quality, healthcare safety, organizational development, sort of learning environments, all those kinds of things that for many years people had been investing in, and we were just expanding the knowledge that individuals had at the ground floor about things like high reliability, about things like healthcare quality, about things like patient safety, or any kind of the processes that contribute to those. I look at other industries, for example, and they're suffering the same kinds of issues right now, right? Where because of the changing times, the rise of artificial intelligence as a work adjacent tool for many people is changing jobs out there. So people are not necessarily having the same kind of investment in their learning as we all used to. And I think that there's an expectation sometimes that people will retain that knowledge and that culture, even when the organization pivots to a new framework, but they don't. Unless we are reinforcing it every single time, they don't. It's kind of like your kids and manners, right? And stuff. So I have 3 kids. They range in age right now from 36 to 27. And there was not a phrase that went by in their early years where please and thank you were not added to those. And if they didn't, I reminded them. Or things like thank you notes, reminding, kids to send thank you notes when they get presents, or reminding them to return calls, or, sort of everything that I've done with my world in terms of healthcare um, administration, we'll call it, whether it was specifically in healthcare quality and safety or in other areas, has been about reinforcing the culture in every way that we possibly can. So it's not just about the learning that we do, it's about the people we hire, it's about the mission and the vision that we set. It's about ensuring that people understand what you're trying to accomplish.
I agree, especially when you touched on the, saying thank you and sending thank you notes and making sure that you're following up and calling. That's really important when we're talking about culture. It really is. So also too, why is it important for healthcare leaders to understand systems thinking, Lean Six Sigma, and operational excellence?
So, Lean Six Sigma has been around for 30 or 40 years in industry, and only toward the end of the 90s did healthcare really start to adopt that in a widespread manner. But when I look at organizations, at healthcare delivery organizations across the country, a lot of them have not embedded that kind of philosophy into the way that they function. Operational excellence is kind of a framework for that embedding of a philosophy of efficiency, effectiveness, and patient-centered care in a way that promotes patient outcomes and that ensures that patients get the same opportunities for every single patient. And when we look at Lean Six Sigma, it's a methodology, right? It's not in and of itself, it's not baked into an organization's culture or an organization's framework, but it's a methodology that we use along with a bunch of other methodologies, Agile, sort of PDSA, sort of if you go bigger, CFR, and some of the ones that use, sort of frameworks that involve the community and involve health policy and government, et cetera. It is for many of us a way that we do our work. We just think about projects in ways that are structured. We think about innovations in ways that promote adoption. And we think about people as stakeholders in everything that we do. And unless we embrace all those philosophies in any methodology that we adopt, in any framework that we put in place, then anything we do to change the way healthcare is delivered is not going to be sustainable.
I agree. Um, Especially when you touch on that it's a methodology and it's a tool to be used. Also, too, what skills do future healthcare leaders need most to succeed?
So I would say, first and foremost, resilience, right? One of the things that we've all seen is everything changes every year. Every year we say, oh my God, it's never been like this. Well, of course it's not. It's never like this any year and going forward with any year because it changes all the time. So right now, sort of the changes in terms of Medicaid availability and how we are subsidizing Medicaid for the states. A lot of states have jumped in to ensure that Medicaid remains subsidized because it's been so good for promoting healthcare availability and access to people who live within their state. But there are also lots of states that don't, and some states that have pulled back now that the federal government is no longer helping to subsidize healthcare. That change over the past year has been one of the biggest ones that we have seen in general. And I do think that as a healthcare leader, having resilience to be able to adapt to those changes and still promote your goals and your values is the most critical aspect of being a healthcare leader. The second thing, and this sounds, I mean, right? It sounds like I shouldn't even have to say this is really crazy, right? But integrity, sort of for us to look up to people, we need to know that people have our best interests at heart and are telling the truth. I mean, that, sort of how crazy is that I have to say that integrity is such an important factor for people who are healthcare leaders, but it is. And so, let's just put it on the table that not everyone tells us the truth all the time, and that's kind of crazy. And then the third one that I would emphasize, especially right now, I would emphasize it, and I say right now in 2026, I would emphasize it, is the concept of humility. I think that, sort of the servant leader model that we saw we saw across many industries, but healthcare really embraced that about a decade to 15 years ago. And I'm not sure that it is embraced as much as I'd love to see anymore. But that notion of putting your people forward and making sure that you're leading from behind, right? And stuff, letting other people take the opportunities, making sure that you're supporting the people who work with you and stuff. That really embodies to me, those three things really embody to me what healthcare leadership needs to look like right now.
I agree. Um, and also, too, I wanted to touch on what defines strong leadership in healthcare today.
So I do think that, as part of what I just stated, I do think putting one stake in the ground is important, right? And saying what one values and what one stands for. So it is, we're talking about healthcare, but I would say that's true in general. For people not to identify where they stand and feel like they can just sit back and not say a word, with so much change going on, I think that's not courage, right? I think one has to be courageous right now. And sort of we all went into healthcare in order to improve patients' lives. Or at least every medical student I've interviewed for admission, I've heard that. And every student that I work with in healthcare safety and quality and in population health, et cetera, it's all about the patient. And so let's put our money where our mouth is. If it's all about the patient, then how is it that we can allow there to be any kind of regression in terms of providing access and care to people? It just makes no sense to me. And so, but I recognize that for some folks, sort of that means they have to be more courageous in terms of saying, sort of we treat everybody who comes to our facility becomes our patient. And everybody who is our patient deserves the best care that they can get that speaks to their own values, that speaks to their own needs. Our ability as healthcare leaders really rests upon being able to provide care to patients, right? We can't lead if there are no patients there. And so I think that it right now it requires courage.
I agree. It does require courage right now, where we are in healthcare. Also, too, what advice would you give to women pursuing leadership roles in medicine and healthcare systems?
So, so I've been in this field for a long time, a long, long time. When I came in to medical school, I did not go to medical school right out of college. I actually went to work for Pillsbury, making cinnamon rolls with icing. And then my dad was a family doc in central Pennsylvania. And I always thought I was going to be a physician. And I just took a little detour, then I came back to it. I came into medicine, there were just under 30% of the class were women. When I went to law school, under 50% of the class were women. And when I go into healthcare organizations, there are lots of women, but they haven't broken through to the top echelon of healthcare uniformly, right? We still see a lot of, what we have historically called glass ceilings that have not been broken. And uh, the number of women who are represented in leadership roles still needs to be adjusted upward, in my opinion, right? We're 50%, 52% of the population and stuff, and it should reflect that at leadership roles. I would also say that women who aspire to be leaders are doing so on the shoulders of everyone who came before them and not acknowledging that, thinking that any one of us did it by ourselves is really a mistake on our part. It doesn't recognize all the groundwork that's been put in place ahead of time for us to succeed. And it doesn't acknowledge all of our colleagues who are doing it at the same time as we attempt to make care better for patients, make care better for families, make care better for our families so that there are workforce issues that are not addressed as well. It is for women right now the best of times, right? and the worst of times, because as we've seen, anytime the economy sours even a little bit, women are often the first to leave the workforce. And yet, we have seen so many women who have been able to support their families through healthcare jobs. We've seen so many women who have been able to grow despite that, the organizations that don't necessarily promote women because of sort of regressive policies. And so I think that as I'm looking at young women who are coming in, I'm saying just aspire to whatever it is you want and just keep working at it. And the doors will open as long as you are willing to be flexible about what it is you want to do and stuff. If you have a path that's just mapped out exactly what you think should happen, the likelihood that that'll happen as you think it should happen is probably slim. But there are lots and lots of ways to get to those leadership roles that are not traditional ways, that are not ways that are already elucidated. And so just stick with it if that's your goal.
I agree. Especially that there are non-traditional ways.
Right. That's
Yeah.
exactly right.
And that's really what it is. Trying to get to leadership if that is your goal. Being
And Makaila, what is tradition anymore, right?
right.
So there's no such thing as tradition, because one of the things we've all learned is that each of our traditions has value. And so bringing together all of our traditions in terms of how we accomplish things makes us stronger, makes us better, makes us more accomplished.
It does. And there really isn't tradition when it it comes to trying to pursue leadership, whatever that may be for one. So also too, how important is mentorship in shaping the next generation of leaders?
Critical. Every generation of leaders, right? And mentorship is so critical. So I started mentoring when I was a medical student. Well, I started mentoring when I was a college student. I had, sort of young kids from a nearby elementary school who were mentees. And I continued it as a medical student when I had a young woman, very, very young woman, 11 at the time, who was my little sister through Big Sisters of Philadelphia. And we are still in touch, and we still, sort of that's now, she turns 50 pretty soon. So that's a long time that we've been together. My career has been shaped by my mentors, by people who recognized something in me even before I acknowledged that I could do it,
Mm.
and gave me opportunities to succeed. So I mentioned earlier that my first role in healthcare quality and safety came from a person who was my boss who said, "Would you like to try this?" And I'd never even heard of the field. And but he had faith in me. And so I was able to take that opportunity and run. My second, sort of most important mentor was another person who gave me an opportunity and stuff. And that's how I got to be chief quality officer at New York Presbyterian and stuff. When we merged, I was at Cornell and we merged with Columbia, and he was the chief medical officer at the time and said, "I think that this is something that you would be interested in doing, is building the quality department." And just essentially just gave me an opportunity that, I mean, that's a once in a lifetime opportunity. Sort of, I don't think any of us knew that the hospital was going to end up as big as it was, but we knew it was going to be powerful. And to have that opportunity to build a whole quality program essentially from the ground up was just an amazing, sort of, one could say right place at the right time, but without his leadership, it never would have happened. And then, and then there have been the little, sort of situations in terms of mentorship and, sort of advice that each of us get, whether it's from, partners, or whether it's from friends, or whether it's from parents or aunts or aunties, or, sort of everybody in our lives. If we're receptive to listening to them and stuff, they're all mentoring us. They're mentoring us to be better people. They're mentoring us to be better work persons. They're, sort of, it's about being receptive to constructive criticism as much as anything else, and somebody taking an interest in you and, sort of feeling like you have enough value for them to put the time in.
No, I agree. And everybody is a mentor in some
Right.
shape or form. Whether it's business, family, like you said, or even personal. Um, so also too, what impact are you most proud of in your career?
Oh, that's a hard one. I mean, because I would say that's a hard one because I don't feel like it's so kind of you to feature me, but I mean, I don't feel like that which I have done is any different than what a lot of other people have done, right? So there are so many other women who are in my shoes who have been able to accomplish the same kinds of things, have been able to mentor folks as well, who have been able to balance work and life and, sort of in their own personal growth, et cetera. And so I don't know that I would say that there's any one thing that I can call out. I am extraordinarily proud that I've been married to the same man for almost 42 years, and we have 3 kids who are productive and happy. And sort of that to me is my greatest accomplishment, is that my personal life, sort of, and it hasn't been without, sort of a lot of rumination on the part of both my husband and me, to make sure that our relationship was the most important thing in our lives. But I think sort of my kids are my greatest impact. I'm just really, really proud of them.
No, I love that. And family's important because that's why we do all of it to make sure that our family's taken care of. I love that. And also, too, what legacy do you hope to leave in healthcare education and systems leadership?
So that's where I'm focused right now. Sort of I feel like my kids are launched. And so I don't have to pay as much attention. And believe me, they do not want the attention. They want me not to be paying attention to them. But I do feel like, and I'm on a mission. I confess that I'm on a mission. I feel like higher education needs to be responsive to the people who are out there in order to not only in order to grow and to recruit new people into higher education, but also to acknowledge that higher education has been off limits for lots of people for many, many years. And sort of, so why am I on a mission? I feel like much like in healthcare, where there have been underrepresented groups of people who get access to the healthcare system. The same is true in education, sort of. So the ability to recruit people from all over the world, from diverse backgrounds that mimic who we are as a country, who we are as a population, who we are as a world, I think that's just so important. And there is the knowledge that we share as instructors doesn't come just from sort of my ancestors would have called book learning. It's from what we learn in life. It's how we apply that knowledge to the jobs that we do. It's how do we, again, sort of embrace change and adapt to change that's in the environment. It's how we ensure that as we are growing, as we are looking forward to 25 years from now or 100 years from now, that we have a sustainable world for our kids. Sort of, I say our kids, I mean, sort of all our kids. I think sometimes of the students as kids, even though, sort of they're just younger than me, but sort of all ages. And how do we think of healthcare as embodying that in a way that works for people in general? And so it is, sort of, it's the basis of how I worked with the medical school to frame the health system science curriculum. It is what I teach in the medical school now when I go in to teach the first and the third and the fourth year students, to sort of remind them of our obligations to the next generation and to the generation after that and the generation after that. It's how I ensure that I expose students to different viewpoints and to also be respectful of the fact that even when we disagree, that that's okay. Sort of we can disagree and we can still accomplish lots of things together. And so it has been my privilege to be teaching and teaching at Jefferson for the past 10 years. I've taught lots of times over my career, but it really has been a joy to teach at Jefferson for the past 10 years and see them really embrace change the way that they have.
No, I love that. And I think that's really important too. And Jefferson is great for that. And also too, wanted to ask, so what gives you hope about the future of healthcare?
So I do, there are a couple of things I think that, sort of all of us think about, sort of anybody who is trained in healthcare in this day and age. The ability to cure disease has never been greater, right? Even with all of the reductions in science at the moment, sort of and quite frankly, the lack of trust by patients in people who take care of them, sort of, and the science behind it. COVID shook all that up for many, many people. But if you look at what we've done to identify diseases and to put treatments in and or start to cure them, the growth has continued to be phenomenal. And so as a scientist, fundamentally, I'm a scientist, and as a scientist, I just have extraordinary, extraordinary hope for the future that it will continue to get better. The second thing is over the past decade, that recognition of structural racism and structural causes of how we have ended up in the situation we have in terms of disparate care, not only acknowledging it, but so many people on the ground trying to fix it, trying to put in new structures and new environments and new processes that make it such that there isn't that kind of disparate access to care or disparate treatment when care is accessed. Lots of people on the ground who just believe in it. And despite what any of us see with, sort of the frameworks we're in, the environments we're in, the, sort of the governments we're in, the, sort of the, sort of people who may not agree with us and stuff. So many people are working toward those goals. And then the third thing is in my lifetime, the empowerment of patients. So as I said, my dad was a doc, and sort of in our house there was a sign on the wall: captain guides the ship, or the captain rules the ship, or the captain owns the ship, or something like that. I grew up in a very traditional family, and patients were not empowered. It was whatever their doctor told them to do. And sort of the number of people who were in other roles in healthcare were all subservient to physicians. And to be quite honest, most of the physicians were white men at that time. And so what we've seen in terms of patient empowerment and the changing of the roles and the changing of the personnel in healthcare over the past 50 years has been pretty remarkable. And I am so optimistic that that will only continue, that we will identify, much like in, sort of in many other countries where, sort of we embrace the concept of laypersons being involved in healthcare and people getting better without any kind of, sort of trained professional and sort of in Western medicine kind of trained professional, and recognize how much environment, lifestyle, all those kinds of things, are brought to bear on people getting better, and utilize that. And again, I look at this, I look at the generation of persons in their 20s and their focus on climate change and their focus on sort of the ability for people to have a voice. And I'm just so optimistic.
No, it's a wonderful thing. And I think I'm optimistic too about it as well. I think we're headed to a wonderful place if we continue to keep it up and always folks, like you said earlier, courage and speak up and
Right,
don't be
right.
afraid to get into a space and, be that representation for patients. Um, so I think it's really important. And now I just want to say, Dr. Cooper, thank you so much for your leadership and
Mary.
your commitment.
You know, Mary. I haven't seen a patient in about 30 years, and that's the last time people called me Dr. Cooper.
Mary.
Uh,
You so much for your leadership and your commitment to building safer and more effective healthcare systems. Your work reminds us that healthcare transformation doesn't happen by chance, it happens through intentional leadership, accountability, and commitment to doing better for every patient. And to our listeners, if today's conversation resonated with you, visit angelsprotection.org to learn more about how we support women, mothers, and future healthcare leaders. And always remember, science protects systems, not people. So let's keep breaking it together. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you so much.